wonderful group of people here. I'm so surprised to see so many. I don't know why, because I know Don and I know he has a good presentation. And also I think we have a lot of people from our neighboring town of Campbelltown, which is very closely connected to Hershey. A lot of you, I mean, I don't know why I'm going to introduce Don Rhoads to you, because I think a lot of you already know him, maybe better than I do. But he is going to give his presentation on Campbelltown and its trolley connection to Hershey. Until recently, he was a neighbor of ours living in Campbelltown, or just outside of Campbelltown, I believe. He is a director at the Lebanon County Historical Society, where he is a member of the Biology and History Committee and a library volunteer. He also has been involved, co-authored publications for the Society in Lebanon, as well as being the author of A Middletown Family, James and Mary Ann Miller Hipple and Their Descendants. Mr. Rhoads has an associate degree in commercial art and is employed by HERCO. I think most of you, as I say, know him already, so Don, we're ready for your presentation.
Campbelltown reunion. I know there's a lot of Campbelltown folks or former Campbelltown folks here. Some people I know, some people I don't know. But anyhow, I appreciate you all coming to hear my talk. Sorry for the loud voice at the beginning, but you need to get your attention. And with people in the back of the room, I think that was the only way we could do it. Well, anyhow, tonight I'm going to talk about Campbelltown and its trolley connection to Hershey. The trolleys are one thing that people sort of relate to in the Hershey area as well as the Campbelltown area. But one thing we must remember that even though we had the trolleys, the town of Campbelltown is 236 years old. So we have a lot of other history in addition to the trolleys that I feel is really interesting, and I hope you will too. And if you have any questions, I'd appreciate if you'd wait till the end of the program, and I'll be glad to answer as many questions as you want to throw at me. And can we have the lights, please? Right dead center in the middle of this track, although the way they have it drawn here was more kind of flipped the other way, that would be up and down rather than horizontal as it's shown here. Anyhow, after Mr. Campbell's death in 1776, it passed to his wife Margaret and his only brother Patrick, who had already moved, like a lot of Scotch-Irish people did, who moved to the west, where he ended up in Cumberland County at the time. Then it went from his brother Patrick, who sold it in 1779, to Peter Grubb. Then from Peter Grubb to Robert Coleman. Robert Coleman had it for a number of years. He was the iron master that came from Ireland and purchased, I guess I want to say, the Grubb's Cornwall Iron Furnace, which you can see today, and it's a historic site, part of the Pennsylvania Museum and Historical Commission in Cornwall, Lebanon County. It was then sold to a family by the name of Wolfersberger, who lived in this house. This was the Wolfersberger homestead, and it is clearly marked on the front. Unfortunately, it's been painted over a number of times, but if you see it with the correct lighting, you will be able to tell it does say P.E. Wolfersberger, either 1813 or 15. I still haven't been able to discern it yet. But anyhow, this was the Wolfersberger home. The older Wolfersberger was in the Revolutionary War. The younger Wolfersberger was a part of the representatives in Harrisburg in the 1820s, like 26 to 29. The younger Philip also founded Union Deposit, which was then called Unionville. But anyhow, unfortunately, I don't have any photographs of the Wolfersbergers. I wish I did. If anybody knows of any existing of these two older gentlemen, please let me know. I'd like to get a copy of them. Anyhow, the older Wolfersberger who purchased it from Robert Coleman separated it into 4 separate tracts then. These I consider actually the individuals who started Campbelltown as being what we consider a town, with houses and lots and things of that nature. One thing I must say, the Alger Farm, which is on East Main Street, I believe was part of the Wolfersbergers, the early houses in Campbelltown. It was one of theirs. I'm not sure exactly which one. Anyhow. Okay, this is Campbelltown in 1860. As we can see, it says Campbelltown with an S. And that just, if you think about it, when it originally first started, it was Mr. Campbell's town. So it is without apostrophe S, but it really seems to fit. Another way is, if you talk to anybody, some people do still say Campbell's Town, other ones just say Campbelltown. But anyhow, this is what the town looked like in 1860. We had a couple stores, we had a hotel, we had a blacksmith shop, we had at least one church, we had a schoolhouse, dead center marked Academy. You'll see that same map over there on the board. You can look at it a little closer. This is Campbelltown now in 1875. It's from the 1875 Atlas. We now have a wagon and blacksmith shop, which is over here on the board, and I will be showing you a little later on. We also have Samuel Johnson's Hardware. We have Dr. Benjamin Stauffer's home. We also have the E. Dissinger Hotel about the center. And we also have the E.B. and Sanders, which later became, which was the hotel then, and still is considered the, well, I still say the hotel, but it's now the Rising Sun. Okay, we're going to get into the churches. This is Salem Lutheran and Reformed Church. At the time this picture was taken, it was used by both congregations, the Lutheran and the Reformed, as most churches did in those days. This church was destroyed by a storm, a tornado, in 1896. The steeple fell into the center of the church. The church fell into ruin. They debated if they wanted to rebuild on this site again, and they did. And we have this church today. It looks very similar to in this picture as it does today. The only difference is the roof part is different, and that was due to a lightning strike in 1985. Luckily, it did not catch the church on fire. It only burned that steeple part. Okay, another church that we had here in town was the United Methodist Church. This was begun, actually the United Methodist or United Brethren, we want to say, originally, did begin in Campbelltown in the 1850s, but died out. Then in the 1920s, it was resurrected again. Their first services being held in the schoolhouse, which is now the township building. Then, sort of, and around that time, there used to be an Old Town Tavern standing on this site. Very old. I do have a photograph of it later on. But anyhow, it was torn down, and this church was built and finished in 2425. Then we also have the United Christian Church, which began about the 1880s. This was on land owned by the Bowman family. This was originally where the United Brethren had their church, originally. Then when they died out and the United Christians moved in, then they purchased it then later on in the late 1800s. This is on, that would be East Main Street. We also had the Campbelltown Bible Church, which actually was an old barn that they converted into a church. This was back on Market Street. It still is there, and I'm not exactly sure what it is now. I think it's daycare right now. But anyhow, that section there off to the left was the old barn part, and that was begun as Union Tabernacle Church in 1932. Then later on, towards the 70s, they decided, well, as a matter of fact, let me check that. Church out on 422. Or 322, excuse me, thank you. Getting my roots mixed up here. Okay, now we're going to talk about the schools. A lot of people in Campbelltown recognize this building. It is still there. It's now a house. This was the first schoolhouse. This was built sometime before the 1860s or on land that was donated by the Wolfersberger family. By 1913, this building was completed. This is the shot of the building as it was just completed, even before school kids were in it. Later on, this building did become, in the 1970s, the South Londonderry Township building. In the 1970s, I'm not sure exactly when, I think it was early, like 72, 73, this ceased as a school building, and then the kids went to Palmyra. Okay, now we're going to get into the trolleys a little bit. I was asked by Kathy if I'd add a little bit more to this, and I hope that I added a few more shots that I think are interesting. This is interesting. This is when the trolley line was being put into Campbelltown. I think it's very unique because actually it's just laying railroad tracks down the center of Main Street. for many years until later on then they macadamized it to a point. Oh, okay. You know where the rising sun is at? You're right about there. It would be about the center of town, I guess, let's say. The rising sun will be on the right in this picture. You can see the belfry of the school building there on the left. That's right. Okay, this was the dinghy that was reportedly brought the rails into Campbelltown. This is actually about where the Wolfersberger home or the nursing home would be. It's that long building behind the end of the dinghy there. This was the first trolley that came into Campbelltown. This, I think, was about 1906. What's interesting about this shot of the trolley is that we have a couple of, well, we have the school class here on the left, and we also have, and it's hard to tell, but I took a magnifying glass and I'm quite sure that's who it is. Milton Hershey's friend, Levy Lepkicker, I guess is how you pronounce it, is the gentleman sort of dead center. There's a taller gentleman next to him, just to his right, this guy with the hat, is Milton Hershey's friend. But this was the first streetcar that came into Campbelltown. It was called a line car. No, from Hershey. As a matter of fact, at that time, it did not extend into Lebanon yet. This is actually where the end of the line was, right here in front of the Salem Church. This shot doesn't really show it too well, but I have another one, and I'm pretty sure that's in here that shows where the trolley wire is tied off. This particular trolley was built in 1895 by Brill, and this was purchased by Milton Hershey for the trolley line from Baltimore in 1907. So this photograph at least goes back to 1907. Here's another shot. There you can see where the trolley wire is tied off, and the tracks end right behind the wheels. Not sure who the motorman is. I wish I did. He looks like he's very happy. This is car number 7, and this was also built by Brill, circa 1895. And this was purchased by Milton Hershey in 1907 in Baltimore, City of Baltimore. This interesting car is not run by the overhead contenderary. During our postcard history of Lebanon County, we actually had a gentleman who recognized it as what he thought was made by the Barber Car Company out of York, PA. This was actually, like I said, it did not use the overhead contenderary. It was a battery car. And as you can see, there's milk cans over here to the far left. This is in front of the Alger farm, or home. Here's an interesting shot. The whole town participated in making sure the trolleys ran. I think this is very neat. I enjoyed this when I saw this. Definitely. You can see the trolley way off in the distance there and all these men forward. That's about, the trolley is sitting right about where the motel, or where Dr. Dawson lives on the other side, which was the Stauffer home. On up to, and here you're at Brandt's Hardware, which is now an apartment building. It's very reminiscent of this past winter, definitely.
That's the way we shoveled roads back in the day.
Oh, geez. Okay. This is the trolley, sort of towards the end. December 21st of 1946 at 12 midnight, the last trolley ran to Campbelltown. This was taken about, 1940s maybe, or the summer even before it ended. Look at those tracks. It's a wonder the trolley even stayed on the tracks itself. That's why I put this shot in here to show you that it really got to the point where it was that deteriorated that you could tell it's close to abandonment. This is actually at the eastern or western end, of town. Just as you're going out of town, Brandt's Hardware would be right there on your left. Okay. In 1945, bus service did start coming to Campbelltown from Lebanon. It didn't last very long, though. They did try it again in the 80s, but that didn't last either. But anyhow, you can see, it's kind of hard to see on here, but in the original shot, you can see where the tracks are still in the street. But like I said, this was taken about 1945, or even maybe even after the trolleys went out. That is the Rising Sun Hotel. Okay. Now we're going to get into some of the businesses in Campbelltown. This was the Wagon Works, what I call the Wagon Works. This is the earliest shot of Campbelltown that I know exists. It was taken about 1880. The buildings on the left-hand side stood right about where the old firehouse in Campbelltown now stands. The row house there kind of off, you start here at the first building here in the foreground and go to the second one. The third red long brick building was, and still exists, or I think anyway, was some sort of workers' housing. This actually was begun, I think, in the 1860s or even before this business. It was owned by Peter Zeger at one point in time in its life. And then later on, the Campbelltown Fire Company, like I said previously, purchased a part of this area, and the last building was torn down, and actually they erected their firehouse, which I think would be here in this foreground. Okay, this is the building today. The building right next to it that you see the edge replaced, was later on a wagon type of building also, and replaced one of those previous older ones that was there before. This is right across the street from the Rising Sun. Now this rustic kind of building, even back then, was the Haldeman's blacksmith shop. This was owned by Addison Haldeman, and it was 2 doors up from the Reformed Church, and now what is their parking lot. In the 1860s, Jonas Copenhaver was listed as the owner. Okay, this is the Rising Sun Hotel, right around the time that the trolleys first started coming to Campbelltown. This, we believe, was taken by Harvey Lineweaver, who was our town photographer, I consider. The sign says the Rising Sun Hotel, H.R. Books, being the owner at that time. And then on the sign it said 1830. I'm not exactly sure how far back the building goes, but we definitely could go back that far. Sometime in the 19-teens, a mansard roof was added. They took the top part down and they added this mansard roof, I guess, to add more room to the top. This was taken in the 1930s, about the time Roy and Ethel Singer owned it. Much different from the earlier shop. And this is it today. All right, this was the Town Tavern. This was the building that the United Brothers got together, and actually I think they rented it first from Harvey Alger and then ended up purchasing it and used it for their church services until the new building was completed, which would have been right directly behind this. Then this particular building was torn down. This picture, I'm not sure exactly when it was taken, well, it had to have been taken before 1920. And Priscilla Rule was the last person who lived in this building. The first owner was a Jacob Schwar, and that was in 1819. So the building, I'm pretty sure, at least went back that far. It was a log structure. Okay, Dissinger's store. I'm sure a lot of people remember what this looked like. Okay, Edward Dissinger came to our town, or to Campbelltown, at the age of 16 from Schaeferstown. That's at the lower end of Lebanon County. He came to live with his brother-in-law, Bernard Forrest, who was the tailor at the time. His sister Polly was married to him. In April of 1869, he purchased the store building, this building, from Felix Gingrich, and he engaged in the merchandising and the hotel business. Later, before his retirement, his son Frank R., that was in 1890, took over the business. This building housed our post office, and until the new one was built in 61. Marlin and Dorothy Dissinger were the last owners of Dissinger's store. He was the, well, I actually should say he was the last postmaster in that particular location until they moved to the new building where it's at now in 61. Okay, this is another early shot. This is E. Dissinger and Sons, and what was to later become the Brant's Hardware building, and also this E. Dissinger and Sons later became the Whitland store, or Stove store. Edward, along with 2 of his sons, that's where the and sons come from, Charles and Frank, purchased this hardware store of Samuel Johnston, who owned it at that time. Edisinger and Sons operated in partnership until 1890. This, then, like I said, this building here on the left eventually became Whitman's. And that is shown over here on the display board. If you haven't seen it, take a look. This was Brandt's hardware store. A landmark in Campbelltown for quite a number of years. It lasted until 1964 when the business closed down. The last owner that I know of was Amos Brandt Jr. This was the location, by reading Kastner's book on Milt Hershey, I found out that young Amos, I call him young Amos, he was old when I knew him. Anyhow, he said that Mr. Hershey's father used to come here by carriage and to pick up gadgets and things for some of the inventions he was always working on. And in turn, he would bring along his blueprints, plans, whatever you want to say, and share it with all who would listen. And it was nothing for him to come in on a Saturday and a group of kids sitting around him and he'd be telling these stories. Incidentally, the little house up top there was for Martin's. And actually, it was built for J.M. Brandt, Jacob Brandt, who was, I think, younger Amos's grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, and placed there by Elam Feldy and others for Martin's. And this is what it looks like today. The Brandt's hardware would be the one on the rush store, funeral home. This was the Arnold's furniture store and funeral home on West Main Street. Sometime in the 1850s, this John Arnold, which was the predecessor to the other Arnold, was a cabinet maker by Taylor, and she still lives, I think, on Chestnut Street in London. Okay, here we have some of the Arnold plan. We have Raymond Arnold off to the far left. The guy with the plane is Harry Flickinger, who married a sister to one of the Arnolds. I'm not sure which sister it is. And then we also have, leaning against the post, Raymond's father, Charles Arnold, who is a justice of the peace, town barber, whatever. And this is what it looks like today. It hasn't changed very much. All right, this building on the side that the rising sun is would be just west of the rising sun, on the north side of the street, or south side, excuse me, was originally where Grumbine's store was, back in the early part of this century. Anyhow, George Grumbine's store was in this particular building, but there was an earlier owner, a man by the name of John Dininger in 1875. The latest owner of this particular business was a Mr. Moyer, whose daughter, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that's who it is, who still owns these buildings. And there was a hardware store in here for quite a while, Moyer's, back in the 30s and 40s, I think she said. This is what it looked like, I'd say just after the turn of the century. This was Grumbine's store in the same building. One thing that's interesting, Campbelltown had a tree-lined street, I want to say, with a fence that seemed fairly endless. Fence isn't here, but if you look at a lot of other shots, you'll see there's quite big fences. Okay, another business we had in Campbelltown originally was E.O. Miller Chevrolet. James Blight, who came from England, actually, and I'm pretty sure, well, I shouldn't say that, but I'd be willing to bet he came over here, and maybe even at the request of Mr. Visser, I don't know, but he did emigrate from England before the turn of the century. We also had a potato chip factory. I'm sure some of you remember the Arrow Potato Chip Factory. Located on Locust Street, near Eager's Bakery, kind of behind where the Spanglers used to live in later years. Let's see, Ira Bayshore was the owner. He produced Red Hots and also Arrow popcorn. On July 25th, 1944, this building burned to the ground. Then a new structure was built behind and continued for a few years more. I'm not sure exactly when the business went out. Okay, we also had Lesher's Bakery later on to become Gingrich Bakery. John T. Lesher started baking in this building, which was on Locust Street, baking bread and cakes. And, okay, well anyhow, we do have a couple people pictured here, and they are identified, which is very good. There was a Jack Nile in here, a Sam Klaus, who were the wagon drivers, see the wagon next door. Bill Drescher, June Lesher, and Harry Neely are also pictured on this shot. The bakers in the bakery were the Fink brothers Van Bill, Harry Neely, and Charles Huber. A favorite item of Lesher's I found out by reading the old Barn and Rifle Club newsletters was a shoe sole. When John retired, his son Edwin took over the business, and it was sold to Aaron Gingrich in 1960. This is when it was Aaron Gingrich Bakery. Same building, different sign. This is what it looks like today. Now, did they what? As a matter of fact, it has been closed since 1992. So if they sold day old bread, it's not there anymore. Well, maybe it is, but it's old by now. Let's see. Organized in 1919. Opened for business on November 1st of that year with a capital of $50,000. Later, the bank merged with the Valley Trust, then American Bank, and now Meridian Bank. The present site on Main Street has been remodeled from this original building. The two large windows and the doorway are still there. The rest of the building was torn down. Oh, is it now? Okay. Oh, did they take over now? Okay, I knew that was in the works. Okay, not that. That's the list. Okay, we also had a doctor, a real early doctor called Benjamin Stauffer. This is Mr. Stauffer. He was born in 1825 and earned a degree in medicine from the University of Pennsylvania. At the age of 20, he came to our town, came to Campbelltown, purchasing a 20-acre tract from the Bachman estate, which was on West Main Street. He built the house right after he got married to a Hetty Hofstetter, who I think was also from the area, and they built this house in 1848. This is the house of Dr. John Dawson. It is the only house that we have in Campbelltown listed on the National Register of Historic Places. A very fitting tribute to this building. We also had another doctor in town, Dr. Risser. I'm sure some of you might remember him. He's the gentleman back here near the door, or in front of the door actually. He is along with the Foreman family, who I think his wife was a foreman. And this is her whole family. Dr. Risser's son down here, Harold Risser, is sitting on the edge of the porch. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there were two other doctors in Campbelltown. That was a Dr. Kiter and what was the other one? Fetterman, that's it. Okay, Dr. Fetterman, I think, was the last one to be in Campbelltown. Kiter, okay, I'm sorry, Kiter, excuse me. I'm glad I have all these people to bring. This was the first band, the Excelsior Band of Campbelltown, which went back to 1891. Mr. Arnold, Raymond Arnold that is, was in all three bands. He is the gentleman here on the far right, holding the bugle or trumpet, whichever it may be. We also had the Shears Brother Band of Campbelltown, and this was in about 1904. Most of the Shear family is on here. Raymond Arnold, again, is in the lower right. Last but not least, we had the Campbelltown Band. It's actually pictured in the Fox's Picnic Grove, up off of the Fox Road in Campbelltown. And the gentleman to the far left with the band director's wand is Mr. Arnold again. Some of the gentlemen in the back I've been trying to identify. The one in the dead middle there in the back is Dave Sholly. I'm not sure. The other two look familiar, but I'm not sure who it is. Oh, is it? Okay. Yes, he is. You're right. Harvey Lineweaver is on there. Okay. Third one in the front row. Okay, that's right. Okay. All right. This was, like I said, the third band. We also had the fire company, which is still here today. This is actually Morris Law on the first fire engine that the fire company purchased in 1926. The original firehouse was actually at E.O. Miller Chevrolet's garage first. Then it was Rutherford Miller at that time. They purchased this Hahn fire truck for $4,080, brand new. Later it was sold to the Ono Fire Company for $300. Okay, this was the former home of the fire company, built in 1930. This is where the PTO had many plays. I'm sure you folks who are from Campbelltown remember the plays. Oh, PTA, excuse me, PTA. And this was where also George Bartlemay had his barber shop in Carroll's. Okay, everybody has heard about the bell, I'm sure. This was a picture of the bell I took just before it left. My father and I went down because I said I wanted a nice photograph of it. We actually took a fireman's jacket, threw it over a chair, sat it on the pool table, and this is the shot that came out. I think it really got good. Anyhow, in 1950, this bell came filled with letters from school children from Campbelltown, Scotland. The school children, as a matter of fact, I met one of them on our trip down to Penn's Landing a few years ago. When was that? 92? We went down to Penn's Landing, 92. We took a bus trip down there, and I actually talked to her. I'm not sure exactly what her name is anymore, but she is still still writing back and forth to her pen pal that she received in 1950. Oh, I forgot to tell you. This was a Lois Seaman. Okay. Has she been? Okay, good. Okay. Let me say this, that the HMS Campbelltown, to give you some background, early background, was a British ship used to blow up the German-occupied St. Nazaire docks during World War II. It actually was given to the British Royal Navy on the Lend-Lease program during the war. This is actually on the new HMS Campbelltown. This is the new HMS Campbelltown bell, and it is dated 1989. Our bell that was in Campbelltown is now on the ship for a duration of 20 years. And then it will be, as the ship is decommissioned, it will be returned, the original bell, to our community, or to Campbelltown. Okay, another organization or group was the Old Barn and Rifle Club newsletter. Actually, there was the Old Barn and Rifle Club, let me say that, and they were in depth. First anniversary issue in October 1944, and this is the staff. Marlon Dissinger is right in the center, and his wife Dorothy is just to his right. Catherine, you're on here. Or Lucille, excuse me. Right behind Dorothy, Lucille is on there. We also have Mr. Hughes, who was a trolley motorman. Second one to the left, okay. Harry Horst, which is your father, is in the back. Catherine Grieve is here in front of or behind him. That was Ira Bayshore, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. And next to Mr. Bayshore is Mrs. Shirk, or Mary Page Shirk, yes. Her father was also once owner of the Rising Sun Hotel. And I think in the back, Clarence Kegerice is on here too. Oh, Paul Kegerice. All right, here we go. This was the Campbelltown Hunting Club. They bagged these buck in 1924. This was actually in front of Laning's restaurant. Right next to is the actually a long yellow sided building right next to the bank. Anyhow, on this picture, front left are Charles Dissinger, Warren Painter, and Harvey Longman. All right, here's an interesting shot. World War I. This is Harry Horst and Earl Kaufman. Harry Horst is on the right, Earl Kaufman is on the left. I'm not sure about Earl Kaufman, but I know Harry Horst was a Campbelltown resident. Okay, this is Henry and Catherine Kreider at their home on East Main Street, which lately was owned by their granddaughter and her husband, which would have been John Engel. Harvey Lineweaver was known to take photographs on his back porch. This is one of those photographs. That is, he had a backdrop and everything. These are a couple guys from Campbelltown, and they are identified. The back from left is Claude Arnold, who was Raymond Arnold's son. Joe Shetter, Clarence Kegrise. Then in the front from left is Simon Kettering and Bill Hamilton. Now, from the original postcard that I saw, that I took this off of, Harvey wrote on here that this was Mary Brandy Weltman. And I did find in the newspaper an actual story about her, and it said, I believe this was a post that was taken for her 90th birthday. Evening Report in Lebanon on February 9th, 1909 had this to say. Mrs. Mary Weltmer celebrated her 90th birthday on Monday. She received many congratulations, 60 postcards, and many other presents. She is whole and hearty and is able to do sewing and housework. She was the mother of Charles Weltmer, who was our townsdale. We also had a creamery in Campbelltown on South Locust Street, maybe. Some people remember that. This is Edwin Swope, who was one of the owners of the creamery. He won first, actually, for his butter in 1901. I found out he won an award at the Dairymen's Union meeting in Newark, Pennsylvania, won first place. You remember the paint shop in Campbelltown? This is Harry Heinrich, who owned or ran the paint shop in this building, which originally was called Lesher and Hoover Hardware Store. Some of the early shots I have, which I don't have on here, shows wagons, sleighs, plows, things of that nature in the lawn around this building. Actually, this building is in two sections. The front section is the original, where all the blue, kind of purplish blue paint is. The newer section is from the white part in the back. That was added on later. I'm not sure exactly when. All right, we also had the Laning's store. This is Harry Laning, who was a Civil War veteran, and his wife, Susan. They opened the confectionery store, which was located in this building on Main Street. It later was inherited or whatever, passed down to their son, Charles Laning, and his wife. And then I think it's passed on down to George Laning, if I'm not mistaken. This is Bill Miller and his auto gyro out in the back field there behind town. Very interesting shot. We also had the Funk family that lived in Campbelltown. Not all these people on here are Funks, but I think Mr. and Mrs. Funk are right about the center, the older couple there. This house was actually a log home that stood right next door to just on the other side of Hinkle Road in Campbelltown, right across the street from the United Methodist Church. It was torn down to make their parking lot for the church next door. This is the Brunner home. William Brunner from Jonestown, Lebanon County, moved to this home on the corner of Lawn Road and East Main Street in 1858. It is assumed that this is the location where he opened a mercantile business, continuing it until 1880. Items sold were dry goods, notions, hardware, drugs, boots, shoes, and what was called Queensware, whatever that is. This was once owned, or this property was once owned by Benjamin Hopper. That's the earliest that I can recall. Mr. Brunner was that was Mr. Brunner's father-in-law, actually. He married Benjamin Hopper's wife. Benjamin Hopper actually was from Hoppersville itself. I'm not sure if he had any dealings with the store there, but I know that that's where he was from. This is what the building looked like back when the Brunner family lived there, when Mary and Miriam were young children. Actually, it didn't have the front porch at that time, no porch at all, and it had an iron fence around it. The building is now owned by Karen Strawbridge. This is Mary and Miriam Brunner on the front porch, living a life of leisure. All right, this house on Main Street, right across the street from where the Miller Chevrolet, where the B&W Subs is located now, was where Harvey Lineweaver lived. This is where he done some of his photography. Actually, in the center of those two doors, he had a board that he would display some of his work. The photographs were taken, I believe, on a back porch part that you can't see in this shot. This is the same house. Actually, now you can see the back porch. There is and it's hard to see, but I know in another shot that I saw, there's a board there. And I know with looking at it, I could see some examples of his work on the front porch. I never really ended up with any photographs of him, like, in terms of with his camera or anything like that at all. Harvey did die, I think, in 1984. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was, 1984. All right, this is Harvey Lineweaver with his sister, Helen Lineweaver. I'm trying to think of who she married. What was the person's name? Well, anyway. And then their parents in the front, Peter and Emma Lineweaver. All right, this house was the Peters home. George and Alice Peters lived here. They were one of the longer residents. We think this house was built by one of the Wolfersberger family. This is what it looked like back when, believe it or before the Peters, naturally. This is when Aaron Ginder and his wife, I'm pretty sure, lived there. Aaron Ginder is the man on the left, or on the right, excuse me. He was one of the school teachers at the academy, which was on Main Street. All right. This is what I call the Brandt home. This actually is presently owned by the Miller family, but it was originally built by Martin Brandt. And here is Martin just after the house was finished. Actually, it doesn't even have the front steps up in the porch. This house is called the Gruber home, or I call it the Gruber home. This is one of the first homes that I know of it that had water, running water in Campbelltown. From what I'm told, up on the third story is a water tank that used to catch rainwater, and through gravity, they had their own water system. They didn't have to pump it. It was just through gravity flow to the different areas they needed it. This house was built in 1903 by Mr. Gruber. It is now owned by a Wally Shepherd, who I don't think lives there anymore, but it is rented out. All right, and here is the Gruber home, probably back when the Grubers lived there. This is a Harvey Lineweaver photograph, I'm pretty sure. This, everybody knows where the Alger farm is, I'm sure. That has come through town. It's the big white house. It used to have a barn next door that burned down a few years ago. But anyhow, this is back when either Benjamin Hopper or the Brenners owned it. It's one of the earlier shots, again, that I have of Campbelltown. Maybe not the earliest, but I do know that this house was built sometime before 1827. It was purchased when Harvey Alger came to Campbelltown in the 1920s. It is still owned by an Alger descendant. Okay, this house was torn down to add the addition onto the nursing home, I believe. I'm pretty sure this is a big place. That was torn down. It's a shame. It was really a nice house. This is at the time where Paul Moyer lived. Oh, it wasn't? Okay, where's that located then? Catty corner from the hardware. All right, thank you. And this is Mr. Moyer. I like this shot. I think I call this the Campbelltown Steam. According to Mr. Lineweaver, Harvey, on the back of this photograph, he wrote, well, he said this was the first automobile owned in Campbelltown. I think he was referring to his father owning, that was his first car. It was called a Locomobile Steam Buggy, as he referred to it. He said his father, Peter Lineweaver, purchased it and then sold it to John Ryder from Paul Meyer, who was a tinsmith. Peter Lineweaver purchased, when it wore out, Mr. Ryder hitched it to some horses and used it in the old home week freight of 1910 in Paul Meyer. Harvey mentioned that the two-cylinder steam engine was partly under the seat, and the driver had to change position for obvious reasons. I guess it's a I have to look back. I think that's good. Lineweaver. The guy on the far left doing the walk up the street there, the blur, is Walker Johnson. Johnston. Is actually what his, yeah, you're right. It sounds like, yeah, like a nickname, but it isn't. That was actually his first name, as far as I understand. And this is the same shot today, about the same location. I couldn't stand in the middle of the street naturally and get run over. But anyway, although this winter I probably could. All right, this is an early shot of Main Street also. I sort of like this one with the carriage there in front. Anyhow, this is Main Street looking east from about your mind store, the rising sun. This photo postcard was dated 1913 and sent to Philadelphia by Carl Haig to his mother. And he says, it reads, this is Campbelltown. You have quite a little walk to get good water, which is scarce, hence Campbelltown. This is the speed limit. This is George Laning at the eastern end of, or western end, excuse me, of town. He posed on this signboard, and I think this is an appropriate end to my talk. Thank you.
I did want to mention to everyone here that we do have some refreshments that will be out shortly for you after the meeting. Also, our archives will be open at the museum, rather, and the library. And we'll see a few pictures that we already have that will be joining in our library room up here at this time.
Oh, and by the way, if you haven't signed my guest book, I would really appreciate it if you would make an effort to get up there if you haven't and sign it. I always like to know who's been at my talk. And this being the most people I've ever had, this would be great. Thank you.